Okay, awesome. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to another session of an introduction to the built environment, where this week we'll talk a bit about landscapes. So we're going up in scale from industrial products, individual industrial products, a cluster of industrial products known as interiors, and then a cluster of interiors or a group of interiors known as structures. And now we're moving from single structures to multiple structures, which are all encompassed or which are all contained in landscapes. I'm just going to disable the waiting room now. But before we start, I just wanna. I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering where all of you are accessing the class from at the moment. And please don't answer. I'm accessing this class from my room. Just one word would be sufficient. Which city are you accessing this class from? We'll take a couple of minutes. We'll take a couple of minutes to get to receive responses from everyone, and I'll pause the recording. I'm going to resume recording now. Um, yeah, it would be nice. It'd be nice if we could actually we could actually greet each other directly and not via this electronic device um, that we normally do. Uh, Anyways, so landscape. Just to remind everyone again, if I hope you don't get sick of this. Hope you don't get sick of this slide, but we're talking about the built environment, which is essentially everything that is humanly made, arranged, or maintained for our purposes, for our wants, and sometimes to reflect our values. And moving on to that, oh, actually, a little bit of a throwback. Uh, Earlier this week, I believe on Monday, on Monday, I received an email from one of you, Farah, I think it was, who asked me what I think about underutilized shop houses, ruko, and what can be done about them. Um, I thought, well, her question was a follow up to last week's lecture on structures, and I think her question serves as a silver lining to a much earlier question at the beginning of the semester, when we were talking about industrial products. An earlier question from Hannah, if I'm not mistaken, about underutilized or empty buildings in cities. And Farah's question was that there are many shop houses or rukos that are underutilized, that are empty. They seem to be unoccupied. But more and more of these shop houses, more new shop houses are being built every day. And she provided me with a thread. I believe it was a Twitter. I believe it was a Twitter post that you guys can access here, intip.in /MFLP, and see. And I guess the discussion revolves around their concerns. Why are people still providing shop houses when they're um, when they're left empty? Well, and what can we do as planners, or at the moment as scholars of the planning discipline? I mentioned a few points of recommendation to Farah on Monday. You're more than welcome to share. You're more than welcome to share my points of views to everybody else. But um, there are several things that come to mind when looking at empty shop houses and new ones that are continuously being built. On one hand, there is a possibility that shop houses are built because people actually buy them, but people buy them for investment, and so rather than using them immediately using them, they leave them empty. Maybe even wait until it multiplies its value, and then either then they will use them, or they would rent them out, or they would sell them. But people who buy shop houses for investment purposes, I believe, then at least those shop houses will get to see some use sometime during its lifespan. But I think the biggest concern is that what happens to the shop houses that are not purchased. Well, I don't know. Some I think some developers I've heard this needs to be verified, of course. I've heard that some developers or some small developers they use it as a money grab scheme, so to say. They secure loans from financial institutions. They build they build really cheap, shoddy shop houses, and then when the bank comes to them for to ask for their money back, then they can declare bankruptcy. They declare bankruptcy. The bank then proceeds with the acquisition of the shop houses, and so the shop houses become the property of the bank, and the people who loan the money, they're free from legal obligations because of bankruptcy. That is yet to be confirmed. I'm not an expert in that field. Maybe we can just focus on what's going to happen with current shop houses and empty shop houses, and I'd like to give you guys an insight on the underlying principle of a shop house. Initially, shop houses were made, and shop houses can be found everywhere, throughout Asia, throughout Europe, even I think in the United States. But the underlying principle of the humble shop house is that the same building combines production, consumption, and living. That this model, the combination of production, consumption, and living, is applied to all continents, from Amsterdam's canal houses to Singapore's shop houses, New York's meat packing district, Buenos Aires, La Boca Barrio, Cairo's bazaars and other Middle Eastern bazaars, to even to Surabaya's old city center, the Kembang Jepun area. In other words, the underlying principle of a shop house is mixed usage, mixed land use. And they were quite popular. They're still quite popular in some parts of the world, simply because you can maximize land use without having to sprawl horizontally. And And from my personal experience and observations, um, sh- shop houses in Europe, as I mentioned, were made to keep the city from expanding. So even the smallest towns would have very dense and very lively city centers, town centers, and most of the structures in these city centers are consist of colorful multi-dwelling and multi-function structures. This the larger picture in this slide was taken from my dorm room in Germany, and it shows a multifunction building in the corner, and sorry, this is the corner right here. A multifunction building in the corner. There's a bar and restaurant on the ground floor, and the basement, and above it, these are living quarters, so dwelling units, and the colorful structures next to it is they are multi dwelling buildings. So multiple families live in these units. And up here, the upper photo. This was in Erfurt, the capital of the state of Thuringia, again in Germany. And these colorful little buildings that line the main road, these are shop houses. You can bakeries, chemists or drugstores, cafes, restaurants, you name it. So all commercial activities occupy. So commercial activities occupy ground floor, basement, and even ground floor, first floor, or first floor, second floor, if you whichever way you like to name it. But I'm going with the I'm going with the I'm going with the British European convention in naming floors. So ground floor, first floor, they're generally used as commercial activities and any other functions and any other activities that support the commercial activity that takes place on the ground floor. And they usually extend the activities on the ground floor usually extend to the sidewalks, to the pedestrian areas up to a certain extent. So outdoor dining, so to say. Similarly, in Italy, this is a picture I took in Bergamo, in the old city center, which is perched on top of a hill. And again, the narrow streets, the narrow alleyways, they're lined with shop houses, pizzerias, bakeries, cheese makers, and then up above it, and then up above here, yeah, that's where the owners live. That's where the owner's family live, and so on. So shop houses, at least from my personal experience and observations, the shop houses work in Europe, and it's been that way for many years, and I believe this model of or this approach to land use planning and land usage will continue to flourish in the years to come. You might be asking, if it's working there, why isn't it working here? Well, it was. Look at old city centers, as I mentioned, Kembang Jepun area, and the old Surabaya city center, full of shop houses, and they used to be very heavily occupied, and they experienced intense use. I believe some of them are still in use until today. Um, but then I think as history, as time goes by, then the city centers become a rather unpleasant place to live, because if you combine production, consumption, and living in one area or in one structure, then there's bound to be some overlaps, and some people might see it as an unhealthy or unsanitary conditions, thereby moving further away from the city center and establishing new residential facilities there. This sort of pattern, I think you should be learning from the planning theory classes, or you will be learning about these things in the planning theory classes, or think I think in the next semester there's a unit called urban morphology, and that's where we explore these city center and urban periphery, the interactions. So why isn't it working here? Again, there's no one size fits all answer to this. Some say that it indicates an imbalance between supply and demand. But if you come back to my statement or my idea or my thought about people buying them for investment, then there should be some degree of demand. But anyways, imbalance being the key word here. And unfortunately, regardless of whether the shop houses have been bought, or they're not, whether they've been bought or not, empty shop houses, regardless of tenure status, they provide opportunities for undesirable behavior. And another thing is that they become eyesores, urban eyesores, and they become some sort of urban brownfields, because they're not getting used. Nobody's maintaining them. Nobody's keeping up with maintenance and everything, and they become run down. So I guess this phenomenon warrants further investigation, and throughout your years in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, I hope you can find answers to this question, and perhaps you can reveal or uncover more of this phenomenon further along the road. One alternative approach to overcoming or to using underutilized, or finding new ways of using underutilized structures, is by applying the HBU approach, or the highest and best use approach. There's one case study in Depok, where the authors Mayang Sari and Utomo, they applied the HBU, the highest and best use approach, to reveal the maximum productive land use along Jalan Raya Meruyung, Kota Depok. Those of you who hail from Depok, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just simply reiterating what I read from an academic journal article online. Mayangsari and Utomo considered the physical feasibility, regulatory feasibility, financial feasibility, and of course maximum productivity. They use these four variables to determine what is the highest and what is the best use for underutilized plots of land and underutilized structures um, along Jalan Raya Meruyung, and they found that offices yielded the highest land value and the highest productivity along that road. Of course, they only considered four variables. If you added more variables, then perhaps the results would be different, or they'd probably find more than just one type of function or one type of land use. But yeah, offices and perhaps commercial activities would be the best way to use underutilized structures on that particular street. But if you search around, there are plenty of these scientific these academic articles that um, that provide you or that proposes alternate ways or many different strategies on how to revitalize and reuse structures and other brownfields, and empty lands in the cities and in cities and in city centers. Now let's dive into our topic of this week. And now landscapes are the fourth selected component or the fourth layer in the study of the built environment. It may be more difficult for some of you or some of us, not just you, some of us to perceive landscapes as a component because much of the landscape seems to consist largely or entirely of several different components, um, like natural features such as land, water, vegetation, and wildlife and other living creatures. And but many landscapes feature a combination of humanly created processes of design and products with or within the natural environment. And this component integrates the human, social, environmental, and technical aspects of the built and natural land and creates a setting or a scape. And even the most natural appearing landscape has undoubtedly been shaped, altered, or manipulated to some degree by humans. Vegetations, they can be arranged, placed, or manipulated by human hands and even partly created, genetically modified by humans. And although land is the ultimate natural resource of ancient earthly origin, it can also be formed or shaped by human hands or machines. There's a variety of shapes and sizes and scales of landscapes, from small, from very small, intimate, or from very small, intimate residential gardens to urban courtyards, plazas, parks, planned unit developments, large recreational developments, and even up to regional watershed management or ecological plans. Landscapes can be rural, they can be suburban, they can be urban places. And most, if not all, landscapes feature creative combinations of natural features, such as plant materials like trees, water and a play of open spaces and built spaces, and yeah, as I mentioned, built spaces, humanly made components like structures, street furniture, street furniture such as railings and perhaps park benches. Don't think there's a picture of any park benches, but gazebos and so on. Most importantly, though, whichever way you look at it, whether it's natural or whether it's artificial, or sorry, not artificial, whether it's natural or man-made, landscapes are very much alive. They grow, they change over time. They celebrate the wonderful delights of oxygen-producing plants and the changing beauty of the seasons. If you're lucky enough to experience landscapes that in a four-season setting, where the vegetation color changes throughout the seasons. Members of the design disciplines or the design or the planning professions that work at the landscape level are usually called landscape architects, but depending on the scale, they could also be called landscape planners or even up to regional planners. Now, a clearer understanding of the various dimensions of this component can be gained by thinking about the similarities and differences among three terms that are very closely related to landscape. Landscape itself, landscaping, and landscape architecture. Now, landscape is a portion of land which the eye can comprehend in a single view, especially its pictorial aspects. A picture representing a natural scenery, or to improve by landscape architecture or gardening. And other similar words can be formed by changing the first syllable, such as seascape, townscape, riverscape, and whatnot. They mean, of course, a portion of the environment, either natural or built, that can be perceived in a single view. So if you're in the middle of a city, so then within landscapes itself, this can be a landscape, this can be a townscape, or if this were a river, then this could be a riverscape, and so on. Anything that you can see within a single view, that is considered a scape or landscape. So you can kind of grasp that this single view has a variety of scales, ranging from the enclosed yard to the panoramic view from an airplane or a mountaintop. If we accept the aforementioned definition, which links scale to the human view, then we can begin to understand the general and specific characteristics or properties of a term that some would argue covers any landscape at any scale, just over the fence or far distant hills. There's then there are three other terms that are very closely related: landscaping, landscape architecture, and the landscape profession. Now, landscaping simply means to improve the landscape. It's a verb. To improve the landscape, to make the land more beautiful, especially by adding natural features like trees and plants and water features, perhaps land and rock formations, and so on. Landscaping is very synonymous with landscape gardening or gardening in general. Landscape architecture is a profession focused on the art and science of designing, planning, and planning the natural built characteristics and the stewardship of land to produce the best aesthetic, the best scientific, and the best ecological conditions, considering the uses to which the land is to be put. And finally, the landscape profession. This implies public declaration knowledge of the craft, knowledge of the art and craft, and the science of the design, management, and planning of landscapes. And this includes education, apprenticeship, even all the way up to professional licensing. And speaking of professional licensing, some of you may have heard, or some of you may know someone who is affiliated with the Indonesian Society of Landscape Architects. Like any other professional society, for example, the Indonesian Institute of Architects, the Indonesian Society of Planners, IAP, Ikatan Ahli Perencana, the Indonesian Society of Landscape Architects deal with not only the design, but also with professional development and certification for landscape architects in Indonesia. I don't really know whether their certification is accredited up to Southeast Asia level or maybe Asia Pacific level, but that's something that you guys might want to check out. Visit iali.or.id or scan the QR code if you'd like to visit their website and find out a bit more about the Society of Landscape Architects. Now, when we talk about landscapes in general, this is something that I also teach in site planning, and talking about landscapes today is similar to what I'll be talking about. It's similar to what I'm talking about, or what I talk about throughout the semester in the site planning unit. Now, landscapes have many different attributes, but all these different attributes can be categorized into three larger groups: physical attributes, biological attributes, and cultural attributes. Now, the physical attributes include topography, hydrology, soil properties, the geology and the microclimate. Then we have the biological attributes, which talk about ecological communities, vegetation, wildlife habitats, and so on. Whereas cultural attributes more deal with land use, open space configurations, regulations, property, sensory perception, and infrastructure. And in the scope of this class, will be staying true with the scope of this unit. I'm going to focus on the cultural attributes only throughout our session. Now, when we talk about cultural attributes or cultural resources, sorry, I forgot to change the font color. It's supposed to say cultural and historical context there. Cultural and historical resources are those tangible and intangible aspects of cultural systems, both past and present, that are valued by or representative of a given culture, or that contain information about a culture. A development that fits the site is responsive to the site's cultural and historical context. So if you find a cultural or a historical bit of landscape, and you happen to be fortunate enough to develop something not in it, but nearby or adjacent to that cultural landscape. Say, for example, if you have the opportunity to build a residential development a couple of kilometers away from Stonehenge, and your particular project happens to be situated in a place where where potential buyers can have an unobstructed view of Stonehenge. Then incorporating Stonehenge into your new development, and in other, of course, you might not be incorporating these massive stones into your development, but incorporating that view into your development can help strengthen a sense of place, and it can help strengthen the identity the identity of your new development. Other ways of incorporating cultural resources into new development would be to adopt and to some extent adapt the design styles, construction materials that are indigenous to the region, and all of those. But in a nutshell, coming back, in a nutshell, being able to incorporate cultural and historical context, cultural and historical resources can help you give a little bit more character and a little bit more and help bolster the identity of your design or your development. If that was Stonehenge, and now we're looking at a street corridor, perhaps a historic street, perhaps a historic corridor. And again, if you were to build something, if you were to introduce something new, if you were to a setting like this, where the buildings have been there, the original buildings have been there for perhaps even hundreds of years, and you're going to introduce something new. Your new building will be among or in the middle of these cluster of historic buildings. Then you would need to, up to a certain extent, preserve or try to preserve the historic building and the historic neighborhood character. You wouldn't want to introduce something that is so contrasting to the rest of the neighborhood that it stands out like a sore thumb. Um, in trying to understand neighborhood or community character, um, really relies on being able to identify the key defining attributes of those traits or that character. Kevin Lynch, in his seminal work, The Image of the City, Kevin Lynch developed a conceptual framework to assess urban structure or legibility. Legibility, another word for legibility is clarity. Structure, clarity, and to explain how people form cognitive maps or mental images of the built environment. Now, as a way to help people understand or help people visualize neighborhood character, visualize a sense of place, and so on. Lynch theorized that cognitive maps help with orientation and movement or wayfinding in built environments and landscapes that have a strong sense of place. He posits 5 elements of urban forms: edges, paths, districts, nodes, and landmarks. Edges could be anything which is basically a linear form, like shorelines, streets, or major changes in land use, or the border of one land use to another. Paths are streets, major walkways, or perhaps even bike paths. Districts are neighborhoods and major institutions. Nodes are like hubs. They're like I think the best example of nodes are entrances, plazas, and major intersections. And finally, landmarks, any unique building, unique structures such as bridges or dams, and perhaps even distinct natural features. Now, this conceptual framework, paths, edges, districts, and so on, is especially useful in assessing the character of the built environment, the character of a landscape in an area considered for, I don't know, for either redevelopment or perhaps an area that you might consider to investigate further, regardless of whether your investigation is directly related to the landscape or to the townscape. Another way of understanding or trying to understand is by another way of trying to understand the built environment, whether it be landscapes or cities, is a technique for assessing the texture or the grain of the built environment. And this technique is called figure ground mapping. This sort of mapping involves just two elements: the building footprints or the figures, the black or the darker shaded areas that you see, and the spaces between the buildings, or also known as ground. So all this white space is called ground, and the black bits are called figures. Now, the resulting map of solids, figures, and voids, grounds, reveal the texture, I should say, the texture of the built environment, which can vary widely across different communities. They can vary widely across different spaces or scales of spaces, from block to block, and even across time, from decade to decade. Suburban buildings, for example, are typically freestanding objects in space, in contrast to urban buildings like this, which are often connected, and they can become sort of effective shapers of outdoor space. Now, these figure ground diagrams are particularly useful for informing the design and the positioning or siting of new buildings. For example, determining a new building size, determining the building shape, and how and where it is placed on the site. So, if you're a site planner, someday these attempts of evaluating the built environment's existing character can help you design context-sensitive new development. So rather than, for example, let's just build shophouses, but being able to understand how the neighborhood works and how the neighborhood looks like physically can help you bring forth context-sensitive new development. So if the design quality near the site is good, then this context may be worth repeating or emulating. In some locations, however, if existing built environment is poorly designed, then these maps can be the beginning of the avenue to new or to neighborhood improvement. So an assessment of building character, for example, considers at least these attributes: facade, height, width, proportion, proportions of window and door openings, horizontal and vertical rhythms, material, color, shapes, and texture, roof forms, and so on. Um, most of these attributes throughout your academic career at the department, you might not even touch or go anywhere near these. Like, for example, proportions of windows and door openings. That's a very micro scale compared to what we normally talk about in urban and regional planning, because we're talking about a larger scale of development. But facade height, width, and proportion, and building setbacks from the streets, even down to signage, then the positioning of signages, then that's where we come in. A little bit more about evaluating a site's cultural context. You can also benefit from analyzing the typologies based on character defining attributes, building height, building style, year of construction, location within the urban to rural continuum, and so on. Now, a building typology can also be based on different uses, for example, residential, commercial, educational purposes, religious purposes, sustainability practices, water and energy efficiency, location efficiency, or perhaps even renovation status. For example, fully refurbished or high renovation potential. But there are, but anyways, within a neighborhood, within a certain neighborhood, I think there are at least three typologies that I can think of. Single family houses. I think most of us would probably live in single family houses. And then there are multi-family residential towers, such as apartments or rusunami, mixed use residential and commercial development. These are shop houses. A little further about buildings and how they shape the neighborhood character. Um, Neighborhood and building typologies can be documented on image boards with photographs. So if you're trying to understand if you're trying to understand or trying to read a landscape, analyze a landscape, then the building typologies, neighborhood and building typologies can be, you can document them on image boards with photographs. You can use annotated street elevations and sections and maps that show locations of representative buildings or neighborhoods within each type. But in addition to the influence of buildings, the character of the built environment is also influenced by the circulatory or the circulation system configurations. They can be defined by land use combinations, size, placement, and the design of outdoor open spaces, and even construction materials. This particular house, some of you might know it. This is the Hundertwasser house in Vienna, in Wien, Austria. Wasn't built by an architect. It was built by a sculptor, Hundertwasser, which gives it a unique texture, unique experience, I reckon. And if you were to develop something, with such a strong identity, next to something with such a strong identity and such a strong character, yeah, good luck. Well, personally, as someone who's as a trained architect, I think Hundertwasser's works are very unique. They're unique one-off works, and I don't know. Depending on your taste, I find it a bit. I find it a bit eclectic, but it has a very, very strong and very, very distinct character to it. And I think somehow, if I remember the neighborhood correctly, somehow the neighborhood around or the neighborhood surrounding the Hundertwasser house, which is a multi-family dwelling compound, the neighborhood is pretty bland. It's pretty monotonous, and then all of a sudden you get this festivity of colors and textures dancing in front of you, so to say. Unique. I hope you get it. I hope you get a chance to visit it someday. A very, very unique structure, and walking through the Hundertwasser house is a very, very unique experience. So speaking of construction materials and surface cladding materials, there are some regionally distinctive construction materials, like locally quarried stones, or maybe certain types of rocks or boulders that have been deposited during the last, I don't know, ice age. There are perhaps even native and naturalized vegetation that can also contribute to a site's or to a neighborhood's unique identity and an atmosphere. It could be, we're still talking about the historical context and neighborhood characters. It could be because of a long history of occupation and segregation, such as this is a photo of the Bund in Shanghai. The Bund or Waitan is lined with many European looking architecture or European style architecture, which is reminiscent of well, it's not reminiscent, but which which documents Shanghai and China to a greater extent, and China's history of of being split apart, of being segregated and divided into different concessions, different European concessions, that is, for the purpose of trade. So this sort of development pattern, if you assess the existing neighborhood and community development patterns, can also help inform context sensitive built-in context sensitive design. Um, and I highly recommend any of you whenever you walk through or drive through a neighborhood, just try to observe and try to get a sense of how the neighborhood feels, and see and try to and ask yourselves questions like, how did this neighborhood come into being? What is the historical context behind? What is the story behind these neighborhoods, and so on? And you'd be surprised at what you can find. Another form of cultural resource is public places. And public places should also be considered when you're assessing a neighborhood and community context. Any community asset that contribute to a neighborhood's character and sense of place, that includes parks, schools, libraries, and community centers. Libraries are not so popular here, I reckon, but I've seen some reading reading gazebos or taman baca in some neighborhoods. As a matter of fact, there is one reading gazebo near where I live. Unfortunately, that's been shut down due to the pandemic. But Bigger libraries are not so popular here, but all these little pocket libraries, pocket neighborhood libraries, I think they're awesome. Public open spaces. Coming back to public open spaces, they can provide not only visual amenities and outdoor recreational opportunities. Sorry, guys, please. Um, where was I? Visual amenities, outdoor recreational opportunities, but public open spaces are also spaces for stormwater management and other functions of green infrastructure. Both indoor and outdoor places, either privately owned or maybe privately owned but open to the public, they perform very important social functions that help define the character of a place. But the idea of public open places, either indoor or outdoor. They provide opportunities for social interaction and other social functions. I can't I can't tell you how many times I've struck up a conversation with random strangers in different public settings such as these. Um, as a um, as a parent, oftentimes when we take our children out to play in outdoor places like this, when they bring their own toys, and then other children would join in, and then their parents would come and talk to us, even if it's not deeply socially engaging, but at least having it's nice to be able to have conversations with random strangers at times. We don't even get to exchange names or even phone numbers or whatnot, but being able to talk and communicate and engage with other people in whatever setting, be it outdoors, be it indoors. I think I remember the time an elderly couple who took their grandchildren to the library, and because the elderly couple was so tired, we ended up taking care of the little kids, because our kids were playing by themselves. So, but that sort of atmosphere is what that sort of interaction is what these public open spaces are meant to foster. And I think that we need more and more of these spaces. Now, of course, such interactions are subject to public health situations, but it's good to have places like this, anyways. Now, hmm, it's not supposed to be conceptual design principles. I forgot to change that, but this slide was meant to say that in general there are three components to an urban or rural landscapes, not a landscape. So there are open spaces, circulation networks, and of course buildings. Now, when we think of open spaces, think the idea of limiting urban sprawl and reducing the loss of open space is becoming increasingly more and more common in many communities nowadays. The conservation of open spaces, I don't know, either woodlands, grasslands, or man-made open spaces, like in the previous slide. They provide, as I mentioned, a range of social benefits, opportunities for social interaction, but and also opportunities for outdoor recreation, be it be it playing kicks with your friends, with a soccer ball, or just sitting out under the sun if the weather is nice, and engage in an activity that my wife and I love to do so much, and that is people watching. Um, One-way open spaces can be one-way open spaces, because I mentioned open space conservation, and one-way open spaces can be protected is through regulatory means or regulatory approaches that restrict development rights on lands with significant environmental resources. And coming back to the shophouse phenomena, again, I think local authorities also have that power, that regulatory power, to restrict the development of certain shop houses if we are thinking in the lines of supply and demand. So, and the second component is the circulation or the circulatory networks. Um, within the landscape, within the landscape, sometimes we might not think much of it, but when you're presented with an open space, or with and you are tasked to design, for example, the circulation network throughout the site, then it does require an understanding of the site's context, and this includes circulation networks, includes understanding the existing transportation systems within and adjoining the site, where the entry and arrival points are, the entry arrival sequences, and so on. A bit further on that in site planning, but circulation network. Circulation networks and the design principles basically include establishing gateways, and creating this strong sense of arrival. Here I am, finally. That sort of sense of arrival, and you and this sense of arrival can be because of the way the primary entrance is situated, either on access with a building or some other significant on-site or off-site feature, or it could be a visual anchor, or a terminus for an organizing axis. Could be a large specimen or tree, large specimen tree, a hill, or a prominent landform, and other unique natural or cultural features. And the third component of a landscape would be buildings or man-made features. And buildings can, as I mentioned when I talked about the figure ground technique, then buildings can play such a detrimental role in shaping circulation networks, and in shaping and preserving different open spaces and defining open spaces, as a matter of fact. Okay. And other than that, I think we'll discuss this a little bit. We'll discuss this a little further in detail next year when you guys join site planning. So, within a landscape, the open space or open space systems, it is something that most of you would probably immediately think about when you hear the word landscape. It is this open space, whether it's sculpted by humans or whether it's natural. But the open space itself is a very, very vital and most of the times underappreciated component of the built environment. Now, outdoor space in the built environment is generally defined by this thing called the ground plane, and sometimes to a varying extent, also vertical planes. It could be the vertical planes could be a building facade or perhaps a line of trees. And then there are overhead planes or ceilings. The ceilings can be man-made like this, or the ceilings can be natural, like tree canopy or the sky, perhaps. And I can argue that many of the best designed outdoor spaces are partially enclosed by buildings, or perhaps partially enclosed by landforms, by trees or other vertical elements that define the outdoor room and corridors. So, although less enclosed than indoor rooms or interiors and corridors, linked sequences of pedestrian-friendly outdoor spaces can strengthen community's sense of place and even enhance its livability. And perceptions of the built environment are, in part, a function of how visible attributes such as color, shape, size, and texture are spatially arranged. For the sake of simplicity, enhancing the aesthetics or the beauty of the built environment can be reduced to three fundamental design principles. You need to keep in mind unity, balance, and emphasis. Now, open spaces in the built environment, open spaces in the built environment landscape, they range from relatively undisturbed conservation areas to perhaps intensively developed urban plazas. And these developed open spaces have both soft and hard surfaces. And these outdoor rooms and corridors, if they're scaled properly to humans, to its users, if they're properly furnished, if they're properly furnished, and they have links with various walkways, bike paths, that they enhance community livability greatly. They greatly enhance it. Public parks, waterfronts, and other open spaces, they're excellent sites for farmers markets, art exhibitions, musical performances, and other events that can enhance a community's quality of life. But it can also enhance a community's economic competitiveness. This particular park, Roma Street Parklands, is a place where many festivities take place. A lot of musical live performances take place there. And a couple of years ago, my family and I got the opportunity to get involved with a Guinness record-breaking attempt of stargazing, of the most people stargazing in a minute. So we did all that there. I think it was us and maybe 15 or 20,000 other strangers, all coming with different telescopes. And for 1 minute, we had to look at an object in the sky. We all chose the moon. We agreed on looking at the moon. For 1 whole minute through our telescopes, and that was it. That was the record-breaking attempt. It may sound really pedantic and insignificant, but again, um, uh, the sense of the sense of place, the sense of being there, um, the sense of elation at that time of being a part of this enormous community effort, a community event, was really had a really profound and had a really positive impact on us all, I reckon. And when we talk about circulation or circulatory networks, livable communities generally provide transportation choices. You can choose to walk, you can choose to walk, you can choose to ride your bicycle, or in this one is in this case that's a guy on a recumbent bike, or you can choose to take public transit or drive. So choices, choices are key here. Of course, a well-built landscape not only segregates these different modes of transport, but they also connect at some point, not every time, but at some point they also connect various or different modes of transport, and so that means high high levels of street connectivity and transportation network connectivity. Livable communities are or livable communities are generally designed with short blocks, medium density, mixed use development that are usually accessible to high quality transit service. Pedestrian friendly mixed use neighborhoods usually include housing, shops, restaurants, and other services, as well as human scale buildings and streetscapes. And when what I mentioned by human scale buildings and streetscapes here is not the 100-story, 200-story glass and concrete buildings that we see in a central business district, but more 2 to 3 story high buildings with mixed use functions. As I mentioned when I told you the story of when I gave you a bit of an explanation of the shop houses in Europe, that sort of thing. That's human scale buildings and streetscapes. Funnily enough, when we talk about transportation networks, most of the times we address the effort, or we place an emphasis on efforts to minimize traffic delays. But when you're trying to design a livable landscape or a livable community, then you should focus more of your effort into traffic calming and increasing safe and convenient transportation alternatives. Last year when we just arrived back in Surabaya, I think my from this is again a personal experience. My children were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of motorized vehicles, and they did take notice of the absence of public buses in the city, and one of them asked me, can't the government just restrict the number of private vehicle ownership? And I remember saying to him, no, you can't restrict people, you can't restrict what people do, but a prudent thing to do is to give people more options and more choices. And I guess that resonates with the livability principle, because you have, for example, in this picture, you have this picture alone tells you that you have a choice of either walking or cycling. No motorized modes of transports in this picture. There's a highway just down there, and in this one there's a complete segregation between motorized traffic and non-motorized traffic. So if you were to walk or to run or to ride your bicycle, you can do that here, but not up there, of course. So choices, and that's what makes I think that's what makes cities and neighborhoods more livable and more, and I guess just a more pleasant place, a much more pleasant place to live in. Now, providing these sorts of infrastructure throughout your neighborhood, throughout the community, or throughout the city, can help reduce daily motorized vehicle trips, and reduce the daily vehicle miles traveled, thus reducing the polluting impacts of motorized vehicles on the environment. And I think any infrastructure that advocates for the reducing of pollutants from motorized vehicles gets a 2 thumbs up from me. Finally, it's buildings. Buildings, as I said, they do help form, or they strongly influence the other 2 components: the circulatory system and the oh, my brain's dead. The open spaces and the circulatory systems. Sorry. However, what I'd like to say that resonates with what I just said earlier, in the design of infill projects, if you're asked to present or to introduce a new building in an old neighborhood, for example, then the new buildings are expected to become good neighbors, and they fit in contextually. Now, this, as I said, it can be echoed, or it can be fitting in can mean mimicking the mass, the scale, proportion, and other design attributes of nearby buildings, at least if the nearby buildings are well designed. Otherwise, then we'll just have to make do with whatever is best. And when you articulate a building's facade, then that involves choices in different materials, different colors, different shapes and textures. And by mimicking or by echoing the attributes of well-designed buildings in the neighborhood, in the community, or in the city or region, then the new buildings can enhance both the quality and distinctiveness of the local built environment. And I guess that's all. I have to say to share with you all this week. Don't forget to mark your attendance before we end the session. But I would like to invite anyone who has a comment or a question to to unmute and speak their 2 cents.
Excuse me, sir. May I comment on a few things?
Sure.
I'm sorry for not turning on my camera because my internet connection started to lag until the end of the lecture. So my comments is, oh, we know that this is about the shop houses. We know that from what we see that we already have so many houses and etc. Do you think it is possible for Indonesia to create a law that we should stop building shop houses for now, something like that? Like the government say no more shop houses for the next 3 years because we have enough. Is that possible to be done, sir? Or is it something like there's no way to do that because, like you said, we cannot stop people from doing what they want to do?
Okay, thank you for that. That's interesting. It's like I'm doubling down on my own statement of providing people with choices and restricting people's activities. Well, um, when I said providing people with choices, it was on a totally different context to say the shop houses. With the case of shop houses, I think if I remember correctly, through zoning text and zoning codes, you can impose laws to restrict certain types of development. However, again, how much or how far the authorities are willing to go the distance and to implement such regulations is beyond me. However, if we talk about the mechanisms, are there any mechanisms like that? Yes. In short, yes, there are mechanisms. Whether you want to use it or not, it's hard to say. Normally, in professional planning practice, our involvement in urban and regional development can goes as far as providing recommendations, suggestions for future development programs, and perhaps even strategic development decisions. But we but as far as my experience in professional planning goes. That's as far as we can go. The I've worked mostly with the East Java provincial government, and for most of the times, I think they follow through on our ideas. So if we recommend, you should do this, then they follow up on most of those ideas. And then there are other regional or urban governments or city governments who are more reluctant in carrying out these recommendations. Some of them only care about, well, as long as the program, as long as our development program is running. And we just need you to justify our means, for example. Just need you to justify our means to achieve the ends. There are some that are like that, so it really depends on who you're stuck with in that sense. But coming back to whether the mechanism and the regulations are there, yes, they are. Ideally, if we could, for example, stay absent from developing new shop houses, for the sake of, because the old ones are still there and they're not being used. So please stop making them. we could do that, but uh, for the most part, real estate developers are also face this sort of dilemma where they are, I think, bound by regulation to provide to provide, for example, one, two, and three, as in for every luxury house that they build, they need to build two medium-sized houses and three small or affordable houses. I think that 1, 2, 3 principle also entails with it building facilities to building facilities or structures to help facilitate economic development, such as trade, through trade and other services. But we all know that if you build too much of one type of structure, then that type of structure becomes redundant. Nobody wants to use it. And any underutilized structure, any underutilized building in a city means that that building, that structure, that plot of land is not contributing to the city's development, especially not contributing to the city's economical development. It's just sitting there wasting space. So I think that's the sort of situation that we're facing at the moment. So we do have the regulations, we do have the means to stop or to curb this development, but on the other hand, we have this. On the other hand, developers also face this sort of dilemma. Now, ideally, we could bridge these two. Situations where, okay, fine. Look, we need to come to a self-realization, or at least the legal and the legal institution. The legal institutions and the governing authorities should come to a realization, or need to come to a realization, that okay, we've been doing too much of that, so nothing more of that for now. Let's focus on building something else, or let's focus on how to get these underutilized buildings and put them into good use. For example, like that. Sometimes the shop houses may not be underutilized. They seem empty. They seem like they're lifeless, but that's because some of them are used as storage facilities. Storage facilities by their owners. The owners have the shop somewhere else, and they use that simply for storage. But at least if it's being used as storage, it does contribute to some extent to the urban development, urban economical development. But otherwise, the empty ones that are just sitting there and rotting, I think something needs to be done to prevent the future growth the future growth and development of these shop houses, and we should focus our resources to putting them into good use. So thank you for that, Hannah.
Yes, thank you too, sir.
Would anybody else like to comment or offer me a question? Last week I gave you a task to observe your immediate surroundings, so to say. I would just like to remind you that if you feel that you need to consult with me, because you'll be submitting a report and you will be presenting your partner's observations. So if you have any questions regarding that, you can ask me. You can ask me that in this session right now, or alternatively, as some of you have already, you can send me an email, or you can send me an email and consult your draft with me. I'm more than happy to do so. Um, on a related note, I think a couple of days ago, somebody wrote to me, um, and somebody wrote to me about the Star L model, or Star L model of reflective writing. Um, I think you can find that. I think you can find that guideline, the guide to reflective writing in the classroom, and the idea of that guide is to provide you with a structure, to structure your ideas, and you're more than welcome to use that guide to compose. If you were asked to summarize a guest lecture, for example, you can use that framework to you can use that framework to summarize the guest lecture, because STAR stands for situation, task, action, results, and lesson learned. So you can use that. You can use that. You can use that description, or you can use that structure to sort of describe what the guest lecture was about, what the guest lecturer tried to, what their objectives were, and if they presented a case study, then what's going on in the case studies, the action and the results of the case study, and perhaps even you can add in some of the discussions that that took place there, or he asked something, she asked something, and they and the guest lecturer responded this way, so and so, and then finally lessons learned. And my takeaway from all that lecture is blah 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 blah. So I think that's a very versatile structure. You can use it for guest lectures. You can use it for you can use it to format or to structure your reports, which you will be submitting a lot of reports throughout your academic career. You can even right up until using it to structure your final undergrad thesis, which is still a few years away, but yeah, you'll get there someday. So yeah, that's all I needed to say for about the Star L framework for reflective writing. Use it to your heart's content. If you ever have any questions, or if you have any doubts on how to use the framework, then you're more than welcome to contact me, just as your classmate did. Is it okay to submit the report with PDF format when I present using PowerPoint? Okay, that was a private chat in the chat box. Yes, for every one of you here, you can use a PowerPoint presentation slides to present your partner's observation in this task, and whereas the report, you can either send a Microsoft Word document, or if you're more comfortable with PDF, then you can convert the Word document into PDF and submit the PDF instead. Just just don't forget, when you submit the report, to accept the submission statement, to click submit and accept the submission statement, because as I mentioned in the instructions in classroom, that if you don't click those two things, then classroom will save your document as draft, and I can't access that document. When will we present our partner observation? Um, let's see. If I remember correctly, the deadline for the report is tomorrow. So we should have the present. We can have the presentations next week. We can have the presentations next week, and and both the report and the presentation will make up one of the four one of the four uh, one of the four evaluation items for this class. So yeah, we'll have the presentations next week. I have somebody raising their hand. Go ahead, Nadine.
Good morning, sir. I have a question regarding the report. So at the report, I see there's part when we should write our partner observation. Should write it like our point of view after we do our partner observation, or just copy pasting what they talk about our surrounding. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there are two ways of doing this. There are two ways of reporting your partner's observation. One is they can write down their observations, and you can copy that into your report. Or the ideal way of doing it is for you and your partner to share your observations, and you take notes of your partner's observations, and those notes are the ones that you transfer into your report. Whichever way you decide to do is entirely up to you. But I would prefer that you do the second scenario where you discuss with your peer, and this is my observation. How is yours? And when they say, "Oh, I observed such and such," you take notes, and those notes you transfer as part of your report. So yeah. I hope that clarifies things with you, Nadine. Okay, great. Last chance to ask any questions or comments. Yes, Hannah.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask regarding the report. There in the report, you said that we could put in the maps and diagrams. Me and my teammate really understands on what should we put in the maps, but we don't quite understand what should we put on the diagrams. What are the types of diagrams you want to see or you want us to provide?
Well, the use of visual aids such as maps, diagrams, tables, they're not compulsory. But the option is there for you to use if you feel comfortable in using it. Maps, okay. Maps, I guess, if you decide to share, for example, the floor plan of your house, then I can consider that as a map if you decide to share it. If you don't, that's fine. But diagrams, maybe, for example, if you would like to illustrate a flow. Let's see now. Stop sharing for a bit. If you decide to for example, to illustrate a flow of activities. For example, this is my entrance, and right next to my entrance is my living room, and from there it connects directly to the kitchen, for example. So that sort of diagram, if you decide that I think words. I think if I describe this in words, it would be a bit too much. But maybe I should. You can use a diagram to. You can use a diagram and other visual aids to help you with your explanations. That's pretty much what I meant by using diagrams. But if you think that you're comfortable enough in describing your observations through narrative means, through text, then that's absolutely fine. I'm not making visual aids a compulsory part of the report, but if they are there and they complement your report, they help your explanation, then that's awesome.
All right, thank you so much, sir.
No worries. Alrighty then. Thank you guys very much for your for attending this morning's session. Hang on. What's the component in the PowerPoint that we should present? How many minutes we present the presentation? Okay. There are 18 of you. So I would say it should be a very short presentation. I think I'd give everyone a slot between because we only have about 2 hours, so maybe about 5 minutes per person, because it's only going to be a really it should be a short and concise presentation. It's not an overly it shouldn't be an overly detailed observation. Anything that you left out in the presentation, you can add to it in the report. So make the idea or the principle that you should consider in this is make the report as detailed as possible, but the presentation as brief and as concise as possible. So anything that you've missed out, you can find that bit of information there in my report. So 5 minutes per person, and we'll try and get a bit of a discussion, a question answer session in the end, if possible, if time allows us to. Okay. Anything else? Oh, sorry, the components. Well, whatever it is in your report, that's basically it. But I think the general flow of the presentation should be you introduce yourself to the class, and then talk about this is my observation. This is the observation of my house or my boarding room, or an observation of the things that are around my my living room, for example, and then just roll the descriptions from there. What is the approximate dimension? Do you feel, does it feel claustrophobic to be there, or do you feel agoraphobic being in the middle of that room, for example? And then, oh, sorry, not you, but your partners. So my name is A. I'll be presenting my partner's observation. They live in such and such, and this is their observation. Done. I think that's pretty much it. That's right. I forgot that this is a personal observation with a twist. So You're welcome. Right, I think that's all from me today. And again, thank you all very much for attending this morning session. Thank you all very much for the questions and the discussion. I look forward to receiving, if any of you would like to forward any questions or any discussions, or perhaps even suggest a topic that we could discuss in the coming sessions, send me an email and we'll talk about it there. Okay, have yourselves a very lovely day, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you. Good morning, and assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.